one of the things that's interesting, it's a correlation between the professional fire and the physical fire. As we've said, you can't out-exercise poor eating.
Yeah.
You can't out-earn poor spending.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Four Fires Podcast, where we talk about winning in all four of the essential areas of life.
Welcome back to another episode of the Four Fires Podcast. Today, Alan and I are going to be talking about what you do with it. And so what we're talking about there is your money and your professional fire. So there's a quote that says, what you do with your money is far more important than how much money you make. You can make $1 million a year and spend all your money, or you can make $100,000 a year and save a lot of money. Mm-hmm. With the professional fire, we know it's about identifying what your craft is, what God has uniquely gifted you to do, and then you have to figure out the best business decision or the best way to convert that craft into cash. But I would argue that the professional fire doesn't stop there. Alan, you and I had a conversation the other day about a dollar saved is more valuable than a dollar earned.
Yeah.
And
yeah, you want me to unpack that?
Yeah.
So this is such an important concept, and it's really simple, and sometimes it seems so simple that we just glaze over it. But if you're a business owner, you know what your margins are for the products that you sell. If you're in the grocery business, then your margins are around 3 to 5%. If you're in some other businesses, you might be clothing, you might be in the 20 to 30% margin. And what that really means is that for every dollar, if you run a company that operates at a 20% margin, for every dollar that you sell, you get to keep 20 cents of it. It costs you 80 cents to make a dollar, and you get to keep 20 cents of that dollar. So to earn a dollar, you have to sell $5. So take that and extrapolate it out, to earn $1 million, you have to sell $5 million. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about, okay, well, hey, I'm going to focus on growing this business, and we're going to try to increase sales from $1 million to $1.2 million. Well, you added, for the extra $200,000, you added, another $10,000 in profit, or $40,000 in profit. Right. So once you get to a certain scale, what matters more is how lean can you be? Because for every dollar that you earn, it might be worth 20 cents. But for every dollar that you save, it's worth $1. Mm-hmm. And so it is important that you are mindful in your business about your expenses. Where can you eliminate expenses that are unnecessary?
And even if you're not a business owner, just being mindful of the money that you're spending.
For sure.
I would say that the first step would be figure out what you're spending. So look at your monthly expenses and look at your yearly expenses. I just had a conversation with a guy who just did this, and he looked at his yearly expenses, and he told me, I realized that I need to me and my wife, our family, needs to cut back on things. We spend too much money. And he's got they have a good household income, but he's like, we spend too much of our money on stupid things. And so I was like, well, what's an example? I was just curious. And he was like, man, I realized just by going and looking at it that my family, or his household spends $80 a month on candles and scents for their house. And he was like, that $80 a month on candles and scents? And he was like, we're gonna continue to buy candles and scents, but maybe we could spend less than $80. So it's just little dumb things like that.
Yeah.
And maybe there's 10 things like that add up, and then that's close to $1,000 a month that you're just spending on stupid things. So I would say Your first step would be like figure out where your expenses, what you and your household are spending money on, and that would be the first step to being able to manage it. Because if you don't measure it, like if you don't, you can't manage what you don't measure. So I would say that's the first step on figuring out what you do with it.
Yeah, I mean, you think about $80 a month. I mean, you're going to be spending close to $1,000 a year on candles.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if you just went with like the normal smell of your house?
Yeah.
And saved that $80 a month and spent $1,000 taking one of your kids on a father-son trip or a mother-daughter trip, or I mean, you can take a pretty cool $1,000 weekend trip.
Yeah.
There was a study that was done about it was a study on happiness, and it was looking to see where people get more of their happiness from, and one of the aspects of the study was around how people spend their money. And what the study found is that people who spend their money on experiences and on services had much greater long-term happiness than people who spent their money on things. So somebody who spent money on having their lawn mowed, or going on a vacation was much happier than somebody who spent a little more money on a nicer car. But we live in a very things-driven economy. So it's important that I think we be mindful of like, what if you're the family that doesn't live in the nicest house in the neighborhood, but you're the family that takes the coolest vacations in the neighborhood?
Yeah. And then this is just something I think about for my professional fire, and I want to be a good steward. I know that everything comes from God, and my abilities come from God, and then the money that I make is a blessing from God. And so I want to be a good steward of that money. And so the four things that I want to be able to do, and we've talked about it, or at least have said it before on the podcast, of I want to provide for my family, I want to be generous, I want to be able to save, and I want to be able to invest. And so I understand that there's a certain threshold, like everyone's threshold may be a little bit different, but there is a certain amount where like you have to have a decent income. You can't make $20,000 a year and like try to live this, the ideal life. So there is a certain point where like, you have to increase your income to a certain level. It's different for everybody, whatever you think. But if I can do those four things and manage my money well, then I feel like I'm being a good steward with what God's given me, rather than seeing how many cool things I can buy with the amount of money that I have. Like how much can I? It's like taking it from, oh man, how many cool things can I buy for myself, and maybe even my wife and my family, and it turns it to what would God want me to do with my money.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed as we work with a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners is there's a different mentality around money. And some entrepreneurs that we work with are very revenue focused. Let's just make as much revenue as possible. Some entrepreneurs that are a little more mature are more profit centric. And then probably the highest level thinkers are the people who think about wealth. And there's a difference between those three. And it requires almost a mental evolution to get into that mindset. But one of the things that's interesting, it's a correlation between the professional fire and the physical fire. As we've said, you can't out-exercise poor eating. You can't out-earn poor spending. And so there are numerous examples of people who have come into an incredible amount of wealth, whether it's to win the lottery, they were professional athletes. Michael Jackson was the king of pop, made a pile of money, and died in debt. Because at some point, those people have not been able to really build wealth because their spending habits never got in check. And so I think one of the things that as we think about developing our professional fire and that ability, yes, we've got to have our craft. We got to bring value into the world. And we need to receive some cash, but what you do with that cash that you get, you can't just, you have to have some kind of discipline around how you spend that cash.
Yeah. On another podcast, we talked about the motives matter. So it's like, what's your motive on where you're spending your money?
Yeah. Yeah. It's easy to get consumed in, well, I've got all this money in my hand. And so let me burn it.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about, man, maybe I'm an overspender. Maybe I'm somebody who has not always been real disciplined around being mindful of wealth generation. I want you to think about your financial status in terms of not just an income, but of net worth. Net worth is an interesting metric because it takes into account all of the debt that you have. And I know some people who make $100,000 a year who have a much higher net worth than some people who make $200,000 and $300,000 a year, because the $200,000 and the $300,000 a year people are saddled with an awful lot of debt to go along with that. So I think one of the things that is helpful in this journey is, what you measure matters, and measuring the right things. We've kind of said, stepping on a scale, I actually don't really care what I weigh from a physical fire perspective.
Right. Or it's not the only factor.
It's not the only metric,
Yeah.
right? Like I care much more about body fat percentage and muscle mass percentage
And my ability.
and abilities than I do about just what that total weight on the scale says. Similarly, don't just look at, I went from $150,000 a year to $200,000 a year. That's not really the metric that's going to determine whether you're wealthy or not.
Right. That's good.
Or financially healthy. So what we need to start thinking about is net worth. Start thinking about wealth in that term. The net worth, way more valuable metric for overall professional health than just the total revenue or income line.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you just made me think another action item on top of figuring out what your net worth is and then maybe setting a goal for what you want it to become is get a professional mentor. Like, hopefully you can find someone that's in your life that you're like, man, I know that guy is a professional when it comes to the professional fire. Like, he knows how to achieve professional success. So I want to go pick his brain. You don't have to listen to that person or even a couple different people. You don't have to be identical to them, but being able to learn from someone in that space. So having a professional mentor is another great action item that you can do for yourself.
Yeah. That whole as iron sharpens iron thing is really useful. Most of us have one fire that we tend to be naturally gifted in. There are people in your lives that are just really dialed in on the physical fire. You have people sages in your life, people who can just kind of read and understand relationships better, and they can help you navigate those more effectively. We have people who just seem to have the Midas touch when it comes to business, and we have people who are deeply spiritually minded and just seem to have a greater connection with God than we have. And if we will put people in our lives in each of those areas and recognize them for their natural genius and their giftedness, and not be like confrontational and adversarial around that, just recognize them for their gift and invite them into our space. And I think we stand to benefit a lot.
I think it's okay to say, to tell someone, I recognize that you are very good in this area and I would like to learn from you. It's important to approach, we'll say, a professional mentor, and I want to learn from you, not give me all the easy answers just because I want to want to have money by taking some magic pill. Don't approach a professional mentor like you want a handout. You want them to just give you all the answers and you're going to magically become wealthy. Like you have to approach it as, I recognize that you have done a lot of work professionally and you are a professional in this area, and I would like to learn from you. Not give me all the easy answers because I don't want to do the work like you did.
Yeah. I need to learn to think like you think.
Right.
Is a question, is a way that we can honor someone's gift and recognize that the work still lies with me.
Yeah.
In fact, the work is probably going to be harder for me than it is for them because that's their area of giftedness and genius.
Yeah.
But I still want to improve in the areas that you're good at, and I think you can help me go further faster.
Right.
So I think that's key. So especially when we're talking about the cash that we receive, right? It's that one level deeper than not just get the cash, but what you do with it matters. Can you use it to provide for your family, to be generous, to save, to invest? There's some wisdom that exists in those spaces. I think it's important that we think about net worth rather than just income. Yeah, I think that metric, how we measure that, matters a lot.
Yeah.
And then the ability to find coaches or people in their area of giftedness who are going to help you evolve your thinking in that space.
So I hope that gets you thinking about a deeper level of health in your professional fire. I hope some of these action items that we've listed off are things that you'll take some time to go do and start diving deeper into the nuts and bolts of the professional fire and figuring out wealth creation more so than creating an appearance of wealth for those around you. So thanks for taking the time to listen to this episode, and go live intentionally, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Four Fires Podcast.